Our anniversary banner still hung on the wall when my card died at the florist. Twice. "It's just a glitch," my wife said, too quick, steering me back toward the car. It wasn't a glitch. By midnight, I had found all of it. The savings gone, the kids' college fund scraped to nothing, 10 years of "we can't afford it," while she bled us dry at casinos she swore she never touched. I thought that was the bottom. Then someone knocked. A stranger on my porch, holding a folder asking for my wife, by a name I didn't recognize. Not a nickname, not her maiden name, a name that opened a door I never knew existed in my own house. And behind it lay everything she had spent 10 years making sure I would never find. I'm Tobias Walsh. I'm 33 years old, and the man on my porch already knew more about my marriage than I did. Let me take you back 12 hours to the last good hour of my old life, because I need you to understand how ordinary it all looked, how easy it is to love someone for 10 years and never once check the locks. The morning of our anniversary, I woke before the alarm and lay in the dark, listening to my own house, the furnace ticking, Silas talking to his stuffed dinosaur down the hall, Vivian breathing beside me, one hand curled under her chin the way she slept the night I married her. 10 years, we made it, I thought. Not everybody does. Downstairs, the kids had taped their banner across the kitchen doorway. Happy 10 years in Hazel's careful 9-year-old print, the letters climbing uphill toward the end because she ran out of room. Silas had drawn a lopsided cake underneath with 6 candles, because 6 is the only number that matters when you're 6. I stood under it with my coffee and grinned like an idiot. I want to be honest about the man I was that morning. I trusted my wife completely, not the lazy kind of trust where you just stop paying attention, the chosen kind. Vivian handled our money because she was good at it, and because I hated it, and because early on she'd said, "Let me carry this part, Tobias. You carry everything else." So she carried the bills, the accounts, the college fund, the taxes. I carried the truck, the crew, the roofs, and the framing, and the long days that put food on our table. That felt like a fair marriage to me. That felt like love. I ran a remodeling crew for a contractor 2 towns over. Good hands, decent pay, nothing that made us rich. We lived careful. Vivian was the careful one, clipping coupons, driving our old Honda into the ground, telling the kids we can't afford it. So often it turned into a family joke. Hazel would ask for something at the store and answer herself before I could. I know, we can't afford it." Vivian would laugh and kiss the top of her head. I loved her for that. I thought it meant she was protecting us. That morning, I had a plan. I'd take the afternoon off, buy her the flowers she liked, ranunculus, the ones that look like little folded roses, and cook the shrimp thing she loved. My mother had the kids for the night. First night alone in this house in longer than I could remember. I kissed Vivian's shoulder. She stirred and smiled without opening her eyes. "Happy 10 years, I said. 10 years, she murmured. "Can you believe you're still stuck with me?" I said no. She laughed. God help me, I meant it as the best kind of no. By 4 o'clock, I was standing at the counter of Petal and Stem on Main Street, holding a bundle of ranunculus the color of a sunset, watching a 19-year-old kid run my debit card. He frowned at the reader. It got declined. "Try it again. Sometimes the chip's finicky." I wasn't worried. We kept money in checking. We always kept money in checking. He ran it again. His frown deepened. Still no. "You want to try another one?" I handed him the credit card we barely used. Declined. I laughed, because what else do you do? And the laugh came out thin. That's when Vivian appeared at my elbow. She'd come along to pick up wine next door, and she must have seen my face through the window because she moved fast. Faster than the moment called for. "It's just a glitch," she said. Bright. Smooth. She was already sliding cash out of her purse, a folded 20 appearing from nowhere. "The bank flagged the card because we never use it. They do that. It's a security thing." She pressed the 20 into the kid's hand, took the flowers, took my arm. "Come on. We'll sort it later." Here is the thing I keep coming back to. She didn't ask a single question. When your card gets declined, you ask questions. Which account? Is there a hold? Did a payment bounce? A person who thinks it's a glitch is confused. Vivian wasn't confused. She was managing me. I didn't see it then. I saw my wife rescuing our anniversary from an awkward 2 minutes, and I let her steer me out onto the sidewalk into the June light, and I told myself I'd call the bank on Monday. But something small had already gone wrong in my chest. Not suspicion, just a splinter, the way she'd said too fast. The way the 20 had appeared like she'd been carrying folded cash for exactly this. We had a good dinner. That's the part that still guts me. She lit the candles and told the story of our wedding. The one where the caterer's van broke down and my brother drove 40 minutes for grocery store sheet cake, and we laughed the way you only laugh with someone who's been in the trenches with you. She held my hand across the table. She said, "You are the steadiest thing that ever happened to me, Tobias Walsh." And she meant it. I still believe she meant it. Then she went up to run a bath, and I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop to figure out the card thing before Monday, so I wouldn't forget. I want to slow down here because this is the hinge my whole life turns on. I opened the banking app. I typed the password we'd used for years, the kids' initials, and the year we married. It didn't work. I typed it again, slower, wrong. I clicked forgot password and the reset link came to my email, and I set a new one. And I told myself she'd probably changed it after some fraud alert and forgotten to tell me. The checking account loaded first. Balance, $18 and change. I stared at that number for a long time. We should have had close to $4,000 in there. Rent for the cruise storage unit came out of it. My paycheck landed in it every 2 weeks. $18. I switched to savings, the account we'd built for 10 years. The one that made me feel like I wasn't going to leave my kids nothing. $41,000 last I checked, back around Christmas. Zero, not low. Zero. Closed, actually. The account showed a withdrawal history and then nothing. A flat gray line where our safety net used to live. My hands went very still on the keys. I told myself there was an explanation. A transfer, a CD she'd moved it into for better interest. She did things like that. Smart things, money things I didn't track. I clicked into the transaction history, and I started to read, and the floor of my life quietly opened up. Withdrawals, dozens of them, hundreds, cash advances, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, and running down the descriptions over and over in the small gray print the bank uses for the places your money actually goes. 3 words that turned my stomach to ice, the names of casinos. A riverboat 2 hours south, an online sports book, a players club I'd never heard of, charges at 2 in the morning. Charges on days she told me she was at her mother's. Charges the week she told the kids again that we couldn't afford the trip to see the ocean. I scrolled until the number stopped meaning anything. Then I opened the last account, the one I could barely make my hand click. The college fund, Hazel's and Silas's. The 529 we'd opened the month Hazel was born that Vivian deposited into every month, that she'd told me just this spring had crossed $36,000. Enough that they'll have a start, she'd said. Enough that they won't owe their whole lives. The screen loaded. I'm not going to tell you the number yet. I'm going to tell you that I sat in my dark kitchen under my daughter's uphill banner, and I understood that the woman upstairs humming in the bath was not the woman I had eaten dinner with an hour before. She had never been. I had married a story she told very, very well. And then at 9 o'clock, someone knocked on my front door. 3 knocks. Even. Patient. The knock of a man who has done this many times and is in no hurry. I crossed the living room in the dark and opened it, and a stranger stood on my porch under the yellow bug light. 50s maybe, gray windbreaker khakis, the tired competence of a man who works evenings. He held a thin folder against his chest. "Evening," he said. "Sorry to come by so late. I'm looking for a Della Rourke. This is the address I've got." Della Rourke. I'd lived in that house 9 years. I knew every name that had ever received mail there. I knew our neighbors, our mail carrier, the previous owner's forwarding address. I had never in my life heard the name Della Rourke. "There's nobody here by that name," I said. "You've got the wrong house." The man glanced down at his folder, then back up at me, and something in his face softened into a kind of practiced pity I would come to know very well over the following weeks. "You Tobias?" he asked. The splinter in my chest turned into a blade. Before I go any further, this is already sitting heavy on your chest. If some part of this feels like a door you've stood in front of yourself, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps this story reach other people who need to hear it. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one, and tonight I could use the company. Now let me get back to that man on my porch and the name I'd never heard. "You Tobias?" He asked again, gentler, like the answer might hurt. Who's asking? Name's Ray Ellis. I do recovery work for a lender down in the county. He didn't step forward. He kept a careful yard of porch between us, hands where I could see them, the folder tucked under one arm. I'm not here to cause you trouble, son. I've got an account that's gone past due secured to this address under the name Della Rourke. Been trying to reach her by phone for 3 weeks. Numbers are dead, so they send me. I told you, nobody named Rourke lives here. Ray studied me the way you study a man to figure out how much he knows. Then he made a decision, and I've thanked him for it 100 times since. Mr. Walsh, he said, I can't talk to you about somebody else's account. That's the law, and I follow it. But I've been doing this 30 years, and I know the look on a man's face when the ground's moving under him. He pulled a card from his shirt pocket and set it on the porch rail, slow, like you'd set food down for a stray. If the name Rourke ever does start to mean something to you, you call that number and you ask for me, not the front office. Me. There's things about this account you're going to want to understand before other people come knocking. And other people will come knocking. He touched 2 fingers to his forehead, an old man's salute, and walked back to a beige sedan at the curb. How much? I heard myself say. He stopped. He didn't turn all the way around. More than a truck, he said. Less than a house. Ask her, son, not me. Then he drove off, and I stood on my porch holding a business card that said Ray Ellis, Asset Recovery. And behind me, at the top of the stairs, the bathroom door opened, and Vivian called down, warm and drowsy. Babe, who was that? I want to tell you I stayed calm. I run job sites. I've talked men down off scaffolding. But when I turned around and looked up the stairs at my wife wrapped in a towel, hair dripping, smiling, I heard my own voice come out of me, flat and strange. Who is Della Rourke? I watched it happen. I watched a decade of my marriage rearrange itself in the space of 1 second on her face. The smile didn't drop. That's what I'll never forget. It held. But her eyes went somewhere fast and came back, calculating. And she said, Who? Della Rourke. I climbed 1 stair. A man just stood on our porch collecting a debt from Della Rourke at this address, and I sat down tonight to fix a declined card and found our savings gone and our checking empty and hundreds of charges at casinos, Vivian. Casinos. So don't tell me who. Tell me how long. The towel-warm woman at the top of my stairs took a breath, and when she let it out, she wasn't warm anymore. She was quick and precise, and already 3 moves ahead. And I realized with a lurch that I had seen this version of her before, 100 times across 100 dinner tables, and had never once known her name either. Okay, she said. Okay, come upstairs. Don't wake the... She stopped. The kids were at my mother's. She'd forgotten. For 1 heartbeat, that small slip undid her, and I saw fear cross her face, real fear, and I almost softened. Then she said the thing that ended the softening for good. It's not as bad as it looks, she said. Most of that money was just sitting there anyway. Just sitting there. $41,000 we'd saved $100 at a time. Just sitting there. We talked until 3 in the morning. I used the word talked the way you'd use it for a hostage negotiation. She gave ground 1 inch at a time, and every inch was a smaller lie replacing a bigger one. First it was a little online betting. Everybody does it. Then it was, I got in over my head last year, but I stopped. Then, when I put the transaction dates in front of her, a charge from 9 days ago, it became, I was going to tell you after the anniversary. I swear I didn't want to ruin it. Every version had one thing in common. In every version, she was the one it was happening to. Never once the one doing it. The debt happened to her. The addiction happened to her. My kids' college fund had simply, tragically, been in the path of something larger than both of us. I asked her the only question that mattered by then. The 529, the kids' fund, tell me you didn't. And my wife, the coupon clipper, the we can't afford it woman, looked at the floor and said, I tried. I tried. Not I did. I tried. I filed that word away without understanding why it mattered. 2 weeks later, it would save my children's future. But that night, it just sounded like one more evasion. I slept in the truck, not out of drama. I simply could not lie down next to her. I sat in the driveway with the seat back and Ray Ellis's card on the dashboard, and I watched the sky go gray. And somewhere around dawn, I made the first real decision of the rest of my life. I was not going to scream. Screaming was what she expected, what she could work with, what she could turn into a story about her frightening husband. I was going to do the one thing addiction can't argue with and a good liar can't charm. I was going to find out exactly what was true, all of it, on paper. Here's what nobody tells you about discovering your spouse has drained your life. The betrayal isn't one clean cut. It's 1,000 tiny reappraisals of things you thought you understood. Every memory gets audited. The winter, Vivian said the furnace repair wiped out our Christmas budget. I now understood where that money went. The 2 girls' weekends a year at her cousin's lake place. I called the cousin. There had been no weekends. The night 3 years ago, she came home shaking and pale and said a deer had run in front of the car. I think now she'd just come from losing something she couldn't afford to lose. I'll never know. That's the cruelty of it. You don't get your past back clean. You get it back with her fingerprints on every window. I started with the mail. She always got the mail. I'd never thought about it. Now I thought about it. I began bringing it in myself. And inside a week, I understood how the Del O'Rourke door had stayed hidden in my own house. There was a second stream of mail, not to our box, but a P.O. box across town, on statements that occasionally slipped through to the house by mistake. Credit cards I'd never applied for, a players club, an installment lender, all addressed to Del O'Rourke at our address or the box, all in my wife's careful handwriting where a signature was needed. Del O'Rourke, I learned, had been my wife's grandmother, her mother's mother, a woman dead since Vivian was 14. Somewhere along the line, Vivian had reached back and borrowed a dead woman's name and built a second self out of it, one with its own accounts, its own debts, its own credit that never touched mine, so that the man who checked our credit report once a year, like a responsible husband, would find nothing, would find us clean, would find us careful. I called my sister Iris that Sunday. Iris is 4 years older than me, a paralegal at a firm in the city, the person in our family who reads the fine print out loud at Thanksgiving. I told her everything, sitting in my truck in a grocery store parking lot so the kids wouldn't hear. And when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Tobias," she said, "I need you to listen to me and not argue. Are you listening?" "Yeah." "Do not confront her again. Do not threaten her. Do not move money in anger. From this minute, you are building a record, and a record only works if you never do anything you'd be ashamed to read out loud in a courtroom." She took a breath. "And you need a lawyer, not to be cruel, to protect those kids. Because if half of what you're telling me is true, she's going to get scared, and scared people who've been lying for years don't suddenly tell the truth. They find a new story, and the easiest new story for a woman in her spot is that her husband is the dangerous one." I laughed. Nobody who knows me would believe that. "The judge doesn't know you," Iris said. "Get the lawyer." I got the lawyer. His name was Nathaniel Foster, a lean, silver-haired man who'd done family law in our county for 25 years and had the calmest office I'd ever sat in. No diplomas shouting on the walls, just a window full of oak trees and a legal pad he never seemed to write much on. I told him the story. He let me get all the way through it without once looking surprised, which surprised me. "Mr. Walsh," he said when I finished, "I'm going to tell you 3 things, and then we're going to work. First, this is not your fault, and I'll only say that once, because you won't believe me anyway, and we don't have time. Second, an addiction is a sickness, and I want you to hold on to that, because you're going to need to be a person your children can respect when this is over, and hating a sick woman will rot you. Third," and here he did pick up the pen, "the sickness is hers to carry. The lies are a choice, and the money is a fact. We're going to deal in facts. Facts don't cry, and they don't change their story at 3 in the morning." Then he asked me a question that cracked the case wide open, though neither of us knew it yet. "The college fund," he said, "the 529, who opened it?" I thought back 9 years to a folding table at our credit union, a baby carrier at our feet, a young banker sliding papers across for signature. "We both went in," I said, "but I signed. Vivian had Hazel on her. She couldn't reach. She said, 'You do it. You're the responsible one.' I signed." Foster set down the pen. For the first time all afternoon, something moved behind his eyes. "Mr. Walsh," he said slowly, "I want you to go home tonight and find every scrap of paper from the day you opened that account. The welcome packet, the original agreement, anything with a signature. Do not tell your wife you're looking. And call me the moment you find it." "Why?" Because there's a word in this business, he said, called account owner. And I have a suspicion about whose name it is. If I'm right, your wife has spent 10 years believing she controlled something she never actually could touch. I drove home with my heart doing something it hadn't done in weeks. Not hope, exactly. Something colder and steadier than hope. The beginning of solid ground. Our garage held 9 years of the boxes you mean to sort and never do. I went through them after midnight, by the light of a work lamp, while Vivian slept upstairs believing she'd won the argument days ago because I'd gone quiet. Quiet, to her, meant handled. She'd spent 10 years reading my quiet as surrender. It was the last mistake she made for free. I found it in a shoebox marked Hazel. Baby, under a hospital bracelet the size of a bottle cap and a lock of hair in a plastic bag. The credit union welcome packet. 9 years old, the folds gone soft as cloth. I opened it under the lamp and read the front page 3 times to be sure my eyes weren't inventing what I needed. Account owner, Tobias J. Walsh. Successor owner, Vivian A. Walsh. Beneficiary, Hazel Walsh. Account owner, me. Because on the one day it mattered, she'd had a baby on her hip and told me to sign, and I'd signed, and for 9 years neither of us had thought about it again. She deposited into that account every month. She watched the balance climb. She told the kids stories about it, and the whole time, legally, she could no more empty it than a stranger could, because a 529's owner is the only one who controls it, not the person who feeds it, the person who owns it. I tried, she'd said. Not I did. I sat on the cold garage floor, and I did something I hadn't done since the night I found the accounts. I put my face in my hands, and I shook, not from grief this time. From the vertigo of a man who's been falling in the dark and suddenly feels the floor. The next morning, I called Nathaniel Foster from a gas station before work. I read him the front page. He was quiet, and then he said, "Mr. Walsh, I've been doing this a long time. Take the kids somewhere good this weekend, because I'm about to tell you the college fund is safe, and you're going to want to have already forgiven yourself enough to enjoy hearing it." The balance, when I logged in with the reset credentials, sat exactly where Vivian had last reported it. $36,100. Untouched. She'd tried to move it. Foster pulled the record later. 2 attempts, both blocked, because the transfer required the owner's verification, and the owner was a man asleep beside her who'd never known he held the only key in the house. My children's future had survived on a technicality neither of us understood the day we created it. I have never been so grateful for my own laziness in my life. That afternoon, I called the other number on my dashboard. Ray Ellis picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Walsh," he said. The name started meaning something. It did. "Then let's get you educated. Not on the phone. There's a diner off Route 9. I buy." Ray Ellis bought me a bad cup of coffee and laid out my wife's second life across a laminate table, and I made myself listen to all of it without once raising my voice, because a booth at a diner is a public place, and I had already decided I would never again be a man someone could describe as frightening. Della Rourke owed $118,000. Ray walked me through it, respectful, unhurried. A man reading a chart to a patient. An installment loan against the equity in a car. My truck, the title to which I discovered she'd forged well enough that no one had questioned it, because who questions a wife? 2 credit lines maxed and rolled, a marker from the Riverboat Casino, which is a fancy word for a gambling IOU. The house extends to good customers and collects like any other debt. Late fees stacked on late fees. Interest that would make a loan shark blush. All of it legal. All of it signed in a dead grandmother's name. "Here's what I want you to hear," Ray said, tapping the folder he still wouldn't let me read because rules were rules. "This debt is hers. She built it under a separate identity, on her own signature, for her own purposes, and she worked hard to keep it off your paper. In this business, that cuts 2 ways. It means the wolves are going to come for her, not you. But it also means if she's smart, or if somebody smart is helping her, she's going to try to drag it back onto the marriage. Make it a we problem in front of a judge, so it stops being her $118,000 and starts being your 59. He fixed me with a flat, kind stare. "Don't let her. Get ahead of it." I asked him why he was helping me. He turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn on the table. 30 years I've knocked on doors," he said. "Most of the time, the person who answers is the one who ran up the debt. and they lie to my face, and I don't much care. Every so often, the person who answers is the one who's going to get buried by it and doesn't even know there's a hole. Those ones I remember." He shrugged. "My brother married a woman like yours. Took him 9 years in a repossessed house to figure it out, and by then everybody in the family had decided he must have been a tyrant, because why else would such a nice girl fall apart? He drank himself into the ground, defending a truth nobody wanted." Ray closed the folder. "You don't strike me as a drinker, but I've been wrong. I want to stop here and ask you something, because I need to know I'm not the only one who stood in this exact spot. If you found out the person you'd trusted with everything had been living a whole second life under a name you'd never heard, what do you think you would have done first? Would you have blown it up or gone quiet and started reading? Tell me in the comments. I've thought about it 100 times and I'm still not sure I did it right. But hold on to your answer, because what my wife did next is going to test it. She found out I'd hired a lawyer on a Thursday. I still don't know how. A voicemail from Foster's office she wasn't supposed to reach, most likely. But I came home from a job and my house had changed temperature. Vivian sat at the kitchen table with her mother. Marguerite Crane, Margot to the whole town, a woman who ran the Altar Guild and the neighborhood watch and had opinions about my lawn, sat with her hands folded on the table like she'd come to read a will. She'd driven 90 minutes to be here. That told me everything about how fast the ground was moving on their side, too. "Tobias," Margot said before I'd set down my keys, "sit down. We need to talk about what you're doing to this family." What I was doing? I sat because I'd promised myself I'd stay calm, and because I wanted to hear the shape of the story before I had to fight it. And they told it to me, the two of them, passing it back and forth like they'd rehearsed. And maybe they had. In their story, I was the villain. I was the controlling husband who'd made his wife handle the money and then blamed her when times got hard. I was the man who kept my wife isolated, who'd let her fall into a private struggle and then hired a lawyer to punish her for being sick. I was cold. Everyone said so. Hadn't I slept in the truck? Hadn't I gone silent for 2 weeks watching her gathering things? "That's not normal grief, Tobias," Margot said. "That's a man building a case against the mother of his children. What kind of man does that to a sick woman?" And Vivian, my Vivian, sat there and let 2 fat tears roll down and said, in a voice I'd never heard her use, small and frightened and pointed straight at an imaginary jury, "I'm scared of what you've become." I understood, in that kitchen, what Iris and Ray had both tried to warn me about. They weren't going to fight the money, because the money was a fact, and facts don't cry. So they were going to change the subject. They were going to put me on trial instead. A sick woman and a controlling husband is a story a tired judge has heard 1,000 times, and it fits the grooves worn into the world so smoothly that you barely have to push. I looked at my mother-in-law, and I looked at my wife, and I made myself say the calmest, true thing I could find. "The kids' college fund is safe," I said. "I want you both to know that. Whatever happens to the two of us, Hazel and Silas start their lives with something. That mattered more to me than being angry. It still does. It was the wrong thing to say if I wanted peace, because I watched Vivian's face when I said the fund was safe, and for one unguarded instant, the frightened wife vanished, and something else looked out, quick, furious, calculating. The look of a gambler who's just been told the one pot she was counting on is behind glass. She can't break. "What do you mean safe?" she said. Not a question, a demand. "I mean it's where it's always been," I said. "And it's staying there. For them." Margot's hand closed over her daughter's. "We'll see what a judge says about that," she said. "You will not take her children over money, Tobias. I promise you that. Not while I'm breathing." They served me 11 days later. Divorce, primary physical custody to Vivian, child support, spousal support, and, this is the part that stopped my breath, a request for exclusive use of the marital home and a temporary order suggesting the children's contact with me be supervised, pending evaluation of the father's controlling and financially coercive conduct. Financially coercive, from the woman who'd forged my truck title. I read the petition 3 times at my kitchen table, under Hazel's uphill banner, which I still hadn't taken down because taking it down felt like admitting the thing it celebrated was dead. And for the first time since the florist, I was afraid, not of losing the argument, of losing my kids to a story so much cleaner and sadder than the truth. I called Foster. He read the petition while I waited on the line, and when he spoke, his calm had a new edge in it. The quiet you hear in a good foreman right before a hard lift. "Mr. Walsh," he said, "they've made a serious mistake." "It doesn't feel like their mistake. It feels like mine." "They've put the money in play," he said. "By accusing you of financial coercion, they've made the finances the whole case, which means the court is now entitled to see all of it, every account, every statement, every debt." I heard him turn a page. "They think the paper trail is your weakness. Son, the paper trail is Della Rourke, and they just invited her to court." The petition landed on a Monday. By Friday, I understood that being served wasn't the storm. It was the barometer dropping before it. The second knock came Wednesday. Not Ray Ellis's patient 3. A hard, impatient rap from a young man in a cheap blazer who worked for a company I'd never heard of. A debt buyer, Foster explained later, an outfit that purchases charged-off debts for pennies and then squeezes. This one had bought one of Della Rourke's dead credit lines and traced it to my house, and he stood on my porch reciting a scripted threat about a lawsuit and a judgment and, the word that turned my stomach, a lien. "Against the property," he said, bored, like he was reading me a weather report. "You own the home jointly, correct? A judgment can attach to the marital residence." The house. The one asset left standing. The rooms where Silas lined up his dinosaurs on the windowsill. I closed the door in the young man's face without raising my voice, and then I stood in my own hallway with my heart slamming, because the debt had stopped being a number on a screen. It had started walking toward the last thing my kids had. Foster talked me off the ledge that night. "A lien threat is a scare tactic," he said. "Della Rourke's debts are hers, separately incurred under a false identity. A court is highly unlikely to attach them to a home you never encumbered, but unlikely still costs money to prove, and they know it. This is pressure, Mr. Walsh. They want you frightened enough to settle cheap and quiet. Don't be. Add the letter to the file and let me handle the wolves." I added it to the file. The file was becoming a strange kind of comfort, the one place where everything true went and stayed true. Then, on Thursday, I found the thing that changed me from a man defending himself into a man who would not stop. I'd finally gotten the key to the P.O. box. Foster subpoenaed the box registration, and of course it stood in the name Della Rourke, and of course the handwriting matched. I drove down to the postal annex on my lunch break and opened a small metal door onto my wife's second life, and I stood at the counter sorting a stack of statements addressed to a dead woman. And under them, in an envelope that stopped my hands, a statement addressed to someone very much alive. "Hazel Walsh, my daughter, 9 years old." A credit card statement in my 9-year-old's name with a balance, with charges, with a late fee. I have framed roofs in August. I have carried loads that made older men quit. I have never in my life had to hold myself as still as I did at that postal counter, reading my little girl's name printed on an adult's debt. When Della Rourke's credit had finally burned out, my wife had reached for the one clean credit file left in the house, a child's. She'd opened a line in Hazel's name and Hazel's social security number, the number I'd applied for myself in a hospital the week she was born, and she'd fed it into the same machine that had eaten everything else. I did not go home and scream. I want you to understand that this is not because I am a calm man by nature. Standing at that counter, I wanted to burn the world down. I drove instead to a quiet corner of the parking lot, and I called the 3 credit bureaus one after another, and I did the concrete, boring, unglamorous thing that actually protects a child. I froze Hazel's credit. I froze Silas's because if she'd done it to one, she'd do it to both. I filed an identity theft report for each of my children, and I requested a minor fraud investigation, and I drove the statements straight to Foster's office and put them on his desk. He looked at Hazel's name on that statement for a long moment. Then he took off his glasses, and this careful, unshakable man rubbed the bridge of his nose, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. "I've done this 25 years, he said quietly. "I want you to know something, and I want you to hold it during the hard weeks coming. Judges see a great many things, they develop calluses, but a parent who uses a child's identity to feed a habit, that burns straight through the callus. You didn't just protect your daughter's credit today, Mr. Walsh. You handed this court the one fact that will let it see everything else clearly." He slid the statement into a fresh tab. "The mask is very good. This is the crack in it." That night, I sat on the edge of Hazel's bed while she slept, and I did not tell her. She will read this someday, maybe, when she's grown, and she'll learn what her mother did with her name, but she will also learn that the same week it happened, her father made sure it could never touch her again, and that he did it without ever once making her choose between her parents. Both things will be true. They were always both true. The Cranes made their move 2 days later. Margot called and asked to meet me. Alone, she said, mother to father, before this gets ugly for the children. I almost said no. Iris said go, but bring nothing you'd mind repeating, and say nothing you would. So I met my mother-in-law at a coffee shop 2 towns over, neutral ground, and she was waiting in a booth with 2 coffees already poured, and she got right to it. We can make all of it disappear, Margot said. The debts, the lawyers, all of it. The family has resources. I'll write the checks myself this week. Every collector, every card, the whole 100,000. It goes away like it never happened. She folded her hands. And in return, you drop the divorce. You drop the custody business. Vivian gets treatment. Quietly. Somewhere good. And this family stays a family. Nobody has to know a thing. For one dishonest second, it tempted me. Not the reconciliation, the disappearing. The idea that a check could close the metal door on Della Rourke forever and give my kids back a mother and a father under one roof. Then I understood what she was actually offering. Not a rescue, a rebuild. The same wall patched and repainted, around the same rot. You've done this before, I said. It wasn't a guess, something in how smoothly she'd said the whole 100,000 like she'd priced it in her head already. 2 years ago, you cleaned it up once. Margot's face did something complicated. And here is the one moment I'll give her, the one crack of real light, because I promised you the true version and not the comfortable one. Her eyes filled, and she looked older than I'd ever seen her. And she said, her father gambled, Vivian's father. 31 years I was married to that man, and 31 years I covered it, moved money, made excuses, kept the lights on and the neighbors fooled and my children believing they had a normal home. Her voice cracked. I kept this family together by keeping my mouth shut, Tobias. That's what a mother does. That's the only thing that ever worked. And now you want to blow it all open in a courtroom. The debts, the name, all of it. And for what? Pride? I sat with that. I could see her whole life in it. 31 years of a good woman keeping a bad secret because keeping it felt like love. I could see exactly where Vivian learned that a lie, held tightly enough, becomes a kind of loyalty. Margot hadn't made my wife sick, but she'd handed her the blueprint for the wall and then helped her build it twice. Margot, I said as gently as I have ever said anything, I believe you kept your family together, and I think it cost you everything, and I think it taught your daughter that the way you love people is by hiding what's killing them. I'm not going to do that to Hazel and Silas. I'd rather they grow up with a hard truth than a quiet lie. I stood and I left the coffee I hadn't touched. Get Vivian help. I mean that, but I'm not paying for another coat of paint on that wall, and I'm not selling my kid's honest father to keep the neighbors fooled. She didn't answer. She was still sitting in that booth when I walked out, a woman who'd spent 31 years believing silence was the same as strength, watching the one man in her family who refused to keep the secret walk into the daylight. I drove back with my hand steady on the wheel and one clear thought running under everything. That was only the first week. Discovery is a strange, slow war. It's fought with envelopes and requests and dates on a calendar, and most of it feels like nothing. Until one afternoon, it feels like everything. The centerpiece was Vivian's deposition. Ashworth's office, a long glass table, a court reporter's fingers waiting over her machine. My wife across from me in a blazer I didn't recognize, sworn to tell the truth. Foster had prepped me for weeks on one principle, and he repeated it in the elevator. We are not here to catch her today. We are here to let her choose her story and write it down where she can never take it back. A deposition isn't a trap you spring. It's a trap she builds, one confident answer at a time. So I watched my wife build it. For 2 hours, she was magnificent, in the way that still makes my chest hurt. She told the coercion story smooth as water. I kept her on an allowance. I audited her spending. Her private struggle grew in the airless room of a controlling marriage. She wept at the right moments and steadied herself at the right moments, and Ashworth guided her through it like a conductor. If I hadn't lived my own life, I'd have believed her. That's not a figure of speech. I sat there and understood, coldly that a person can be that good and that sick at the same time, and that the two things feed each other. Then Foster took his turn, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not spring anything. He asked her small, boring questions, one after another, and let her answer them under oath. Had she ever gambled at the Riverboat Casino 2 hours south? No, she'd never set foot there. Had she ever held a credit account he, Mr. Walsh, didn't know about? No. If there were hidden accounts, they were his. Did she recognize the name Della Rourke? I watched her decide. I watched the smallest flicker, the gambler's calculation, weigh the name against the room, and she chose the confident lie because the confident lie had won her every argument for 10 years. No, Vivian said into the record under oath, I've never heard that name in my life. Foster wrote one word on his legal pad and moved on to something dull about household budgets. He didn't look at me, but under the table, out of the reporter's sight, he tapped the file once with 2 fingers. She'd just signed the thing that would end her, and she thought she'd won the hour. In the elevator down, Foster finally spoke. In 3 weeks, a lender's agent is going to identify her handwriting on the Della Rourke account, and the transcript we just made will show she swore, under oath, she'd never heard the name. He watched the numbers descend. I don't like doing this to people, Mr. Walsh. I want you to know that. But she was offered every chance to tell the truth today, and she chose the story. Remember that when it gets hard to watch. She chose it. Every time she chose it. The weeks in between were the ones that nearly broke me, and none of it happened in a courtroom. It happened at Silas's t-ball game, where Vivian showed up in the stands and the other parents didn't know where to look. And I coached first base and clapped for my son and said nothing, because a 6-year-old rounding the bases toward home does not need to carry his parents' war on his small shoulders. Vivian caught my eye once across the field, and for a moment we were just 2 people who'd made that boy, watching him run, and the grief of it nearly took my knees out. Then, Ashworth's process was Ashworth's process, and Margot's phone calls were Margot's phone calls, and the moment passed. It happened in the pickup line at Hazel's school, where I learned which of our friends had chosen the clean, sad story about the cold husband, because they stopped meeting my eyes. A marriage ending is a referendum you didn't ask for, and half the town votes on a rumor. It happened at 2 a.m, more than once, when I'd wake certain I'd done it all wrong, that a gentler man would have paid Margot's checks and rebuilt the wall and given his kids a whole home instead of an honest one. I'd lie in the dark of my half-furnished apartment and argue with that gentler ghost until the sky went gray. But every one of those mornings, I got up and did the boring, load-bearing work of being present. I made the grilled cheese, I froze the credit, I added the pages to the file. Foster had told me the truth doesn't win by being true. It wins by being there, on paper, when the story finally has to stand next to it. So I built, one tabbed page at a time. And slowly the file grew heavier than the story. I could feel it, the way you feel a load finally balance on a lift. Somewhere in those weeks, the weight shifted, and the man who'd sat frozen in a dark kitchen on his anniversary became a man walking toward a courtroom with a folder that only made sense one way. Iris made me go to a meeting. Not for me, she said, for understanding. A support group in a church basement for the families of gamblers, folding chairs and a coffee urn, and a circle of people who all wore the same tired I saw in my own mirror. I almost didn't go in. A man doesn't picture himself in a church basement crying about money. But I sat down and I listened, and for the first time in 6 weeks, somebody described my exact life back to me without knowing a thing about it. A retired teacher whose husband had mortgaged their house twice without her name ever leaving the deed. A young woman whose brother had emptied their dead mother's accounts. And an old man who said the thing that finally made the whole machine make sense to me. It's not about the money, he said, turning a chip over in his fingers. It's never about the money. It's about the next hand. The next hand is where the shame goes to die. Every bet is a promise that this time you'll win it all back and nobody will ever have to know what you did. That's the lie the sickness runs on. The next hand fixes everything. He looked around the circle. There is no next hand. There's just the people we drag into the hole while we reach for it. I thought about Vivian's 2 a.m. text. One good run and I can put it all back before you notice. Word for word, the old man's next hand. She hadn't been lying to me exactly. She'd been telling me the truest thing the sickness ever let her believe. I drove home that night with less hatred and more resolve, which I hadn't known could grow at the same time. You can understand a fire completely and still not let it into the room where your children sleep. She made her real play 3 days later at a kid exchange in the parking lot of the library where the court said we'd hand the kids off. The frightened victim version stayed home that afternoon. The woman who climbed out of the old Honda was the one I'd married. Warm, quick, disarming, reaching for me before I'd shut my door. "Can we just, for 1 second, can we just be us?" she said. "No lawyers, no Ashworth, no your sister in your ear." She smiled the smile from 10 years of kitchens. "Remember the caterer's van, grocery store sheet cake? We've survived worse than money, Tobias. We could still fix this. Just you and me. Drop the custody thing and I'll get help. And we start over, and none of these people ever have to run our lives again." And I want to be honest because I promised you honest all the way down. It pulled at me. Standing in that parking lot with the kids' backpacks in my hands, some old muscle in me leaned toward her the way it had for a decade. She was so good. She is still the best I've ever seen. Then Silas called, "Daddy!" from the car, and the parking lot came back into focus, and I understood what she was actually offering. Not a marriage, a recess, a pause in the war just long enough to move the college fund somewhere I couldn't guard it, to slip Della Rourke back into the dark, to rebuild the wall while I held the ladder. "Vivian," I said, and I kept my voice as gentle as I could make it, because the kids were 15 feet away and because I meant it. "I do remember the caterer's van. I'll remember it my whole life. And I am not doing this to punish you. But there's no version of just you and me anymore, because just you and me is exactly how you kept it hidden for 10 years. The lawyers are here because they're the only people in this whole thing who can't be charmed." I handed her the backpacks through the window. "Get help. I hope with everything I've got that you do, but the fun stays where it is and the truth stays out loud. Both things, Vivian. Always both." The warmth went out of her face like a light switched off, and for one unguarded second, I saw the cold gambler under it, the one measuring the table, and she said, low so the kids couldn't hear, "You really are going to open all of it, in front of everyone." "I'm not going to open it," I said. "You already did. I'm just going to stop holding it shut for you." She drove off without another word, and I buckled my kids in and drove the other way, and my hand stayed steady the whole time. Here is what nobody warns you about a custody fight built on a lie. The lie moves faster than the truth because the lie is simple and the truth needs a whole afternoon and a folder. By day, I ran a crew and framed a garage and joked with the guys so they wouldn't ask why I'd lost 15 pounds. By night, I sat across from Nathaniel Foster, building a wall of paper against a flood. The records were the part Vivian and Margot hadn't understood, that by making my money the crime, they'd handed a judge the right to look at all of it. Bank statements, credit reports, both of them, mine clean as a whistle and Della Rourke's a house on fire. The forged title application, the 529 history, including 2 blocked transfer attempts stamped with the date and the reason. Owner verification failed. Foster spread it across his table one night and looked at it the way I look at a set of framing plans that finally square up. "They accused you of hiding money and controlling her access," he said. "Every single document says the opposite. You deposited your paycheck into a joint account for 10 years and never took a dollar out for yourself. She moved it out, in secret, under a false name, to places she swore she never went. In the language of this court, that's called dissipation of marital assets, and the person who did it doesn't get to also be the person the money was hidden from. So we win." He didn't smile. That's how I knew to keep my guard up. "We have the truth," he said. "The truth is not the same as winning. They still have a story, and stories reach a courtroom faster than folders, which is why I need you, between now and the hearing, to be the most boring, reliable, present father this county has ever seen, because they are going to try to make the case about who you are, and the only defense against a lie about your character is 6 weeks of your character, in plain sight." So that's what I did. I took every hour of parenting time the temporary order gave me, and I gave it back to my kids doubled. I coached Silas's t-ball. I sat through Hazel's book report on a horse. I did not say one word against their mother, not one, because Foster had said something in that first meeting that I'd nailed to the inside of my skull. You're gonna need to be a person your children can respect when this is over. But a lie in a house with children does not stay between the adults. It came out on a Tuesday, in my truck, at a red light, driving Hazel home from her friends. She'd gone quiet in the back seat, 9 years old and working up to something, and finally she said, in the too careful voice of a kid repeating grown-up words she doesn't fully understand, "Daddy, did you take Mommy's money and make her sad?" The light turned green. I didn't move. Somebody honked. I put on my hazards and I pulled to the curb and I turned around in my seat and looked at my daughter. And I understood that this was the most important 30 seconds of the entire case and that it had nothing to do with the case at all. I could have told her the truth. God, I wanted to. I wanted to lay it all out. The casinos, the lies, Della Rourke, the fund I'd saved. I wanted my little girl to know her father was not the man in the story. But you don't hand a 9-year-old a weapon and call it honesty. You don't win a child by making her choose. Foster's voice, Iris's voice, my own better self. They all held the line for me in that half second. "Hazel," I said, "here's the truth, and it's the only thing I'll ever tell you about grown-up money, okay? Mommy and I are both grown-ups, and grown-ups made some mistakes with money, and now we're getting help from smart people to fix it. None of it is because of anything you did, or anything you could ever do. And your college money, the money for when you're big, that is safe. I made sure. That is not going anywhere. Do you believe me?" She studied my face with those eyes that miss nothing, the way kids can, and then she nodded, and the tightness went out of her small shoulders, and she said, "Okay, Daddy," and asked if we could get milkshakes. We got milkshakes, and I drove home shaking again, because I finally understood what Vivian was willing to spend. She'd already spent our savings and our kids' fund and her grandmother's name. Now she was spending Hazel, feeding a 9-year-old a script, using the person my daughter loved most in the world to build a wall between us. That's the moment my grief finished turning into resolve. Not the money, the milkshake. I told Foster that night. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, he said, "Write down exactly what she said and when. Not to weaponize it, to remember it, if you're ever tempted to go soft at the wrong moment." Then he said the thing that set up everything that came after. Coaching a child usually means one thing, Mr. Walsh. It means the coach knows the facts are against her. People don't lie to their kids about a fight they think they're going to win clean. The custody evaluator was a woman named Dr. Pruitt. Court-appointed, 60-ish, tired in the specific way of people who spend their careers inside other families' worst weeks. She interviewed all of us. She came to my apartment. I'd moved into a 2-bedroom near the kids' school, so they'd have a room. And she watched me make Silas grilled cheese. And she asked Hazel questions I wasn't allowed to hear. And, for a while, the lie was winning. I could feel it in Dr. Pruitt's questions, which circled my isolation of Vivian, my 2 weeks of silence, the night in the truck. Margot had gotten to her first with the alter guild version of me, the cold husband, the sudden lawyer. Vivian performed sick and frightened, which was not entirely a performance, and that made it deadly, because the fear was real even if its cause was a lie. Twice I left Foster's office certain I was going to become a man who saw his children every other weekend, supervised, in a room with a one-way mirror, paying support to fund the very habit that had emptied their future. The lowest night came 3 days before the hearing. Foster called me at 9. Vivian's attorney, a sharp, expensive woman named Ashworth, whom Margot was somehow paying for, had filed a supplemental declaration. In it, Vivian claimed the gambling itself was a trauma response to my financial control, that I'd kept her on an allowance, that I'd forced her to account for every dollar, and that her private coping had spiraled because she had no autonomy in her own marriage. It was, I had to admit, a masterpiece. It took the truest fact in the case, that she handled all our money, and flipped it inside out until the woman with total financial control became the victim of financial control. Attached were statements from 2 of her friends, and at the bottom, a line that read, "Petitioner is prepared to testify that respondent maintained secret accounts unknown to her." I laughed out loud in my empty apartment. Secret accounts unknown to her. She was describing Della Rourke and pinning it on me. "Can she do this?" I asked Foster. "Can she just say it and have it count?" "She can say it," Foster said, Whether it counts depends on what we can put next to it. And I'll be honest with you, because you've earned honest. If this were a she said, he said, we'd be in trouble. Juries and judges break toward the sad, frightened woman, and they're often right to. I too. That instinct exists because it's usually true. A pause. But this isn't she said, he said. This is she said, and then a mountain of paper that says otherwise, signed in a dead woman's name. We just have to make the paper louder than the tears. In a courtroom, that's harder than it should be. I hung up, and I stood in my kid's half-decorated bedroom. Silas's dinosaurs lined up on the windowsill, facing out like they were guarding the street. And I let myself feel, for 1 full minute, how much I could lose. Not the money. I'd made my peace with the money. My kids. The idea that a version of this ended with Hazel growing up believing her father was a cold man who took her mother's money and made her sad. That Silas would only know me through a visitation schedule. That the truth would sit in a folder in Nathaniel Foster's office, complete and useless, while the lie raised my children. That was the bottom. That was the deepest water. And then, at 10:40 that same night, my phone rang with a number I didn't know, and I almost let it go to voicemail, and I'm glad past all telling that I didn't. Mr. Walsh, said a tired, familiar voice. It's Ray Ellis, Asset Recovery. We had coffee. A pause and something careful in it. I heard through the county grapevine you got a hearing Thursday, and I got a folder here that a certain lender would very much like to stop carrying on its books. I think it's time you and I talked about what a subpoena can make a man like me say out loud. Ray Ellis met us at Foster's office the next morning, folder in hand, and this time nobody stopped him from opening it. I want to be straight about why I'm here, Ray said, settling his bulk into the chair across from Foster with the wariness of a man who spent 30 years on the wrong side of people's doorsteps. I'm not doing charity. My client holds $118,000 of paper on a person named Della Rourke, and that paper's only worth something if a court agrees who Della Rourke actually is and orders it paid by somebody who can pay. Right now, that debt's a ghost. You put me on a witness list, subpoena the file proper, and I get to do the one thing my whole industry dreams about. Hand a judge a clean, validated account, and let the law sort the rest. He slid the folder to Foster. That's not betrayal of your wife, Mr. Walsh. That's the collector's only religion. We just want to get paid by the right person. Foster went through the file the way a surgeon reads a scan. The signature card, Della Rourke, in Vivian's unmistakable looping hand. The same hand that had signed our marriage license and our children's birth certificates. The loan against my truck, with a copy of a title application where my signature had been traced. Well, but not well enough, Foster said, tapping the T in Tobias. A forger always slows down on the capital. Watch the pressure change. The riverboat marker, statements whose transaction dates lined up to the day, with the withdrawals from our savings and the 2 a.m. charges I'd found on the anniversary. When he finished, Foster set his hand flat on the folder like a man swearing an oath. Mr. Ellis, he said, you may be the most honest person in this entire case, and you collect debts for a living. There's a sermon in that. He turned to me. Here's what we have. They're going to walk into that hearing Thursday and tell a story about a controlling husband who hid money and drove a good woman to a private, shameful struggle. And we are going to answer that story not with a better story, but with the one thing a story can't survive. A paper trail that only makes sense one way. He laid it out for me, piece by piece, until I could see the whole machine. The financial coercion claim required that I controlled the money and she couldn't access it. Answer, 10 years of joint statements showing my entire paycheck deposited and never privately withdrawn, and her as the sole manager moving tens of thousands out to secret destinations. The controller was her. The record was absolute. The claim that I'd hidden secret accounts unknown to her. Answer, Della Rourke. The only secret accounts in this marriage wore a dead grandmother's name and my wife's handwriting, authenticated by the very lender trying to collect on them. The claim that I was a danger to the children, unfit, cold, coercive. Answer, a 529 college fund, $36,000 untouched, because the account owner, the one person who could have raided it, chose instead to be the wall that protected it. 2 blocked transfer attempts, dated, stamped in the custodian's certified record. She'd tried to take the last of it. I'd been the reason she couldn't. A judge could argue about a lot of things. A judge could not argue with which parent had tried to empty the college fund and which had shielded it. That last one isn't just a defense, Foster said quietly. That's the whole case in one sentence. When you find the sentence that ends an argument, Mr. Walsh, you don't shout it. You save it for the exact moment the other side has committed to the opposite. You let them build the whole house, and then you show them it's standing on the one fact that isn't true. Iris came out from the city that night and sat at my kitchen table and organized 9 years of paper into tabbed binders, because that's who my sister is. And somewhere around midnight, she reached across the mess and squeezed my hand and said, "You did the hard thing, Toby. You stayed a person she could describe honestly. Most men don't. Most men give her the villain she needs." Vivian gave me the villain's opening anyway. She just did it too late. At 2 in the morning, 3 days before the hearing, my phone lit up with her name. One text. "I don't know how to stop. I've tried. I keep thinking if I win one big one, I can put it all back before you notice, and none of this will have happened." I sat on the edge of my bed and read it 4 times. And I want to be honest with you, because I promised I would. It broke my heart, not the strategy of it. I don't think it was strategy, not at 2 a.m., not that raw. I think for once I was hearing the actual woman under the story, a sick person, drowning, who told herself for years that the next hand would erase the last one, which is the exact lie the sickness runs on. I didn't hate her in that moment. I have never once managed to hate her. That's the part the movies get wrong. But loving the truth about someone doesn't mean handing them your children. I typed and deleted a dozen answers. In the end, I sent one true thing, because Foster had told me to send only things I'd be proud to read aloud in a courtroom, and I found I wanted her to have it anyway. "There's a number," I wrote, 1-800-522-4700. It's the gambling helpline. You can call it right now and no one has to know. I hope you do. But I'm going to protect the kids' future no matter what you decide. Both things are true, Vivian. They were always both true. She didn't answer. The 3 dots appeared and hovered and vanished. I lay awake until the sky went gray for the second time in this story, and I thought about the woman asleep the night I married her, one hand curled under her chin, and I let myself grieve her properly, the way you grieve someone who is still alive, and simply gone. Then I got up, and I put on the one good suit I owned, and I drove downtown to a squat brick courthouse to find out whether the truth, on paper, in a folder, could possibly be loud enough to save my kids from a story. Foster met me on the courthouse steps. Ray Ellis was already inside, subpoena in his pocket, nursing a machine coffee. Iris parked the car. Somewhere in that building, Vivian and Margot and the expensive attorney named Ashworth were rehearsing a version of me I wouldn't recognize. "Remember," Foster said, straightening my collar like my father might have, "you don't win this by getting angry. She's going to want you angry. Her whole case needs you to be the man she described. So no matter what they say in there, no matter what she says about you, about your children, about the kind of father you are, you stay exactly who you've been for 6 weeks. Calm, present, true." He held the door. "Let her build the house. We brought the one fact it can't stand on." I walked into that courtroom the steadiest I'd been since the florist, because I finally understood the shape of what was about to happen. For 10 years, my wife had won every argument in our marriage by being faster than me, smoother than me, 3 moves ahead. She'd built a whole second life on the certainty that I would never check, never read, never find the door. She was about to make her case in a room where the fastest talker doesn't win. The one who brought the truth does. The hearing room held maybe 20 people and smelled like radiator dust and old paper. Judge Hartley, a broad woman in her 60s with reading glasses she wore low and looked over, took the bench without ceremony and told both sides she'd read the filings and had a full docket. So let's be efficient. Ashworth went first, and she was good. She stood and in a voice built for exactly this, painted her portrait of me. A controlling husband, a man who'd insisted his wife manage every dollar so he could audit her, keep her small, keep her dependent. A man whose sudden coldness, 2 weeks of surveillance, a night sleeping in his truck, a lawyer hired before a single conversation about healing revealed his true nature. A woman with a private, shameful sickness, isolated and ashamed, who'd finally broken. And now that husband, exposed as cold and calculating, was weaponizing her illness to strip her of her children. Your Honor, Ashworth finished, we will show that the only secret accounts in this marriage were kept from my client, not by her. We ask the court to protect these children from a father whose response to his wife's illness was not compassion, but a case file. Vivian took the stand. She wore gray, no jewelry, her hair down, and she was luminous and frightened and utterly believable because the fear was true, even though its story was a lie. She spoke about the allowance I'd supposedly kept her on, the way I made her account for every dollar, the loneliness of managing money for a man who never thanked her. She said the gambling started as a small private thing that was mine, the only thing that was mine, and grew into something she couldn't stop and couldn't confess to a husband who measured love in receipts. Twice she wept. Once she looked at me across the room, and I made myself hold her gaze without heat, without pleading, just a steady looking. And I watched something flicker in her, confusion maybe, that I wasn't playing the part she'd written for me. Margot testified to my character, the Alter Guild version, cold, sudden, not a warm man. I never trusted how quiet he was, she told the judge. Still waters. I sat with my hands folded, and I let them build the whole house. Every wall, every window. Foster's hand rested on the folder between us, and he didn't move it, and he didn't object. And once, when I leaned to whisper, he shook his head a quarter inch. Not yet. Let them finish. When Ashworth rested, Judge Hartley took off her glasses and looked at me for a long, appraising moment. And I understood that in that moment, in that room, I was losing. The story had landed. I could feel it settle over the bench like weather. Then Nathaniel Foster stood, and in the calmest voice in the building, said, Your Honor, we won't be offering a competing story. We'll be offering the account statements. May I approach? He handed up the first binder. These are 10 years of the parties' joint bank records, he said. The court will find, tabbed in yellow, every deposit Mr. Walsh made, his entire paycheck, otesoi, every 2 weeks, for 10 years, into the joint account. The court will also find, tabbed in blue, every withdrawal made for his personal benefit over that same decade. He paused exactly one beat. There are no blue tabs, Your Honor. There is not one. The man accused of hoarding money never removed a dollar for himself in 10 years. Ashworth stood. Your Honor, managing the household finances was a burden Mr. Walsh imposed. We'll get to who imposed what, Foster said mildly and handed up the second binder. These are the withdrawals from the marital savings. $41,000, removed over 3 years in cash advances and transfers, tabbed to their destinations. Casinos, an online sportsbook, a riverboat players club. He let that sit. Every one of these transactions was executed by the sole manager of the family finances, not Mr. Walsh. Managing the money, it turns out, was not a cage the husband built. It was the cover the wife needed. The room had gone very quiet. Vivian's chin lifted a fraction. But the petition raises a serious charge, Foster went on, unhurried, that my client kept secret accounts unknown to his wife. We take that seriously, so we've brought the secret accounts into court. He turned to the judge. The defense calls Raymond Ellis. I will remember the sound of Ashworth's pen hitting her legal pad for the rest of my life. Ray Ellis lumbered to the stand, sworn in, 30 years of doorsteps in the set of his shoulders. And he did the one thing his whole industry dreams of. He authenticated the file. He explained, in plain language a tired judge could love, what asset recovery is and how business records work. He identified the account. He read the name on it, Della Rourke. He confirmed the address of record, my house. He confirmed the balance, $118,000. And when Foster asked him to describe the signature card, Ray looked at it over his glasses and said, It's signed Della Rourke. Same hand on every document in the file. Loan application, the marker, the title paperwork on a truck, registered to Tobias Walsh. He set it down. In my professional experience, Your Honor, that's one person operating under 2 names. The debtor and this Della Rourke are the same individual. And is that individual in this courtroom? Foster asked. Ray Ellis looked, for a moment, genuinely sorry. Then he raised one thick finger and pointed, not at me, but across the aisle, at a woman in gray who had just stopped breathing. 3 weeks earlier, in a deposition under oath, that same woman had sworn she'd never heard the name Della Rourke in her life. Foster had the transcript tabbed in the binder, 1 page away. He didn't even need to reach for it. Ashworth was on her feet, objecting, demanding, her composure cracking into something fast and shrill. The judge waved her down and put her glasses back on, and this time she read the file herself, page by page, in a silence so complete I could hear the radiator tick. Then she looked up, and her eyes found Vivian, and there was no weather on the bench anymore, only a very old, very tired clarity. "Ms. Walsh," Judge Hartley said, "who is Della Rourke? And this is the part I need you to understand, because it's the whole reason I told you any of this. My wife did not get caught by my cleverness. Foster never raised his voice. I never said a word. She got caught the way the sickness always catches its people in the end, by her own certainty that she could talk her way through one more wall. It doesn't—" Vivian's voice climbed. "That money was mine, too. It was marital money. I had every right. I was going to put it all back. One good run and I would have put every cent back before he ever—" She stopped, hearing it too late. "Before he ever knew," the judge finished quietly. "That's not—" Vivian turned to me, and the frightened wife was gone, and the fury underneath came up raw and unguarded. "You were never supposed to look, Tobias. In 10 years you never once looked. Why did you have to look now?" "Vivian," Margot hissed. But her daughter was past reach, and so, in the next breath, was Margot. Because Ashworth was gathering her papers to request a recess, and Margot, watching her daughter come apart, forgetting the room, forgetting the record, thinking only like a mother who has done this before, stood halfway out of her seat and said the words that ended it. "This is a sickness, Your Honor. It's not a crime. We handled the markers 2 years ago. We paid Della's debts off once already and got her help. This is a relapse, not a Andres a suivi. So wait." The room understood before she finished. "We paid Della's debts off once already. 2 years ago. They had known. Not just known, they had known the name Della Rourke, known the debts, known the sickness, cleaned it up once in the dark and rebuilt the same wall around it. The secret accounts, unknown to the husband, had, in fact, been known to the wife and the mother-in-law for years. The story that I'd driven a lonely, isolated woman to a private struggle collapsed in a single sentence spoken by the one person trying hardest to save her." Margot sat down slowly, one hand over her mouth, as the weight of what she'd said reached her. "I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that, because I think you deserve the real ending, and not the one that feels good for a second. I felt the specific grief of watching 2 people you once loved destroy themselves in public with words you could never have forced out of them. Foster had told me the antagonist always hangs herself. He was right, but nobody warns you that you have to stand there and watch the drop." Judge Hartley took a long breath and squared the file. "I've heard enough for today's purposes," she said. "Let me be very clear about a few things, so there's no confusion when the transcript is read." She looked at Ashworth. "The allegation of financial coercion by the respondent is not supported by a single document before me. The record shows the opposite. I'm striking the request for supervised visitation. There is no evidence this father poses any risk to these children, and considerable evidence he is the reason they still have a college fund at all." She turned to Vivian, and her voice gentled without softening. "Ms. Walsh, you need help, and I hope you get it. But debts incurred by one spouse, in secret, under a false identity, for a private habit concealed from the marriage, are not going to be redistributed onto the other spouse by this court. And the dissipation of marital assets I've seen today will be accounted for in the final division." She set down her glasses. "Pending final orders. Primary physical custody will rest with the father. The children will stay in the school and the home they know. We'll revisit after the evaluation is complete." She stood. We all stood, and as the room began to move and murmur, my wife looked at me across 10 years and a courtroom aisle, and she didn't say she was sorry, and I didn't need her to. We just looked at each other, 2 strangers who'd made 2 children, and then Ashworth touched her arm and she turned away. And that was the last time Vivian Walsh ever tried to make me the villain of her story. The final orders came through in the fall. The debts of Della Rourke stayed exactly where my wife had built them. Hers separate, incurred under a false name for a private habit, no lien anywhere near my children's home. The $41,000 she dissipated came off her side of the division, dollar for dollar. The college fund sat untouched at $36,000 and change, still owned by the responsible one, still waiting for two kids who have no idea yet that it almost vanished, and no idea why it didn't. Custody rested with me. Hazel and Silas kept their school, their street, their dinosaurs on the windowsill. Vivian gets them every other weekend now, supervised at first, then not, because the court left the door open for a mother willing to walk through it sober. She did call the helpline eventually. She's a year into the rooms now, chips and coffee, and the slow, unglamorous work of it. I don't hate her. I told you I never managed to. I just don't hand her the checkbook anymore, or my children's names, or the story of who I am. Margot and I speak carefully at pickups. She never apologized, but last month she watched me help Silas with his cleats, and she said quietly, not looking at me, "You were right to open the door." 31 years of keeping it shut, and that's as close to peace as we'll get. I'll take it. Here's the boundary I set, the one that changed everything. I stopped mistaking a good story for a true one. In my house now, we say the hard thing out loud. That's the rule. That's the whole rule. If you've ever loved someone so well you forgot to check the locks, if you're standing in front of a door in your own life you're afraid to open, I want to hear from you. Tell me what you found when you finally looked. However it ended, you deserve to know the truth of your own life. You're not alone in the reading of it. I finally took the banner down last week. Happy 10 years in Hazel's uphill letters, the sunset cake with 6 candles. It had hung in that kitchen doorway through the florist and the folder and the whole long fall, because taking it down felt like admitting something had died, and something had. But standing there with the tape peeling under my fingers, I understood it wasn't the marriage I'd been afraid to let go of. It was the version of me who never looked. I folded the banner along its soft creases and I put it in the shoebox in the garage, the one marked Hazel, next to the welcome packet that saved us, next to a hospital bracelet the size of a bottle cap. Then I went inside and made grilled cheese for 2 kids who will grow up knowing exactly one thing about their father for certain, that when it counted, he read every page. And he stayed.